Welcome to the debate. Imagine a financial model created by just a handful of engineers in San Diego. A model so powerful, so dominant, that it eventually forced Apple, the world's most valuable company, to pay billions just to get essential access to 5G. So who decides what innovation should cost? And how did this specific structure end up reshaping, well, the entire mobile industry? Today, we're diving into the strategic core of Qualcomm's empire, their calculated move away from, the tough, low-margin business of making hardware towards a dual business model built squarely on licensing fundamental mobile patents.
Right. And the central question here, the real crux of the debate, is this. Is Qualcomm's technology licensing arm, what they call QTL, is it a justified, maybe even brilliant economic engine, one that's actually necessary to fund the huge, high-risk R&D needed to set global tech standards like 3G, 4G, and now 5G? Or is it fundamentally anti-competitive, an abusive structure that really just functions as an unfair tax on device makers everywhere?
Well, I stand firmly on the side that the QTL model isn't just successful, it's necessary. It acts as this highly efficient innovation flywheel. It generates the enormous capital needed to fund that cutting-edge R&D that lets us all move from one wireless generation to the next. It essentially guarantees Qualcomm's R&D leadership, which I argue benefits the entire global communication ecosystem.
And I'll be arguing that its success, while undeniable in financial terms, really comes at the expense of fairness. The model, I believe, is built on anti-competitive leverage. It results in an abusive system, a kind of double-dipping that extracts value far beyond the actual contribution of their specific component within the device.
Okay, I understand the criticism about, let's call it, the feeling of over-extraction. But I think we really need to grasp the history here, the origin of this strategy, to see why it might have been necessary. This model, QTL, it's the high-margin engine that keeps the whole company running. Think back to their early struggles, the early 90s. People like Win Jacobs realized that making hardware, like their early PDQ phone, which they eventually sold off, was costly, low margin, basically a financial dead end. The real lasting power wasn't in the manufacturing, it was, as they put it, in the brains of the engineers and in the thick documents.
The patents, essentially.
Exactly. The patents, and that realization led to a strategic decision: weaponize the IP. This QTL model ensures a massive, dependable R&D budget. It turns intellectual property into, well, basically a money printing machine, creating this powerful feedback loop. Royalties come in, they fund huge R&D efforts. That R&D leads to more essential patents for 4G, 5G, and so on, which inevitably brings in more royalties. And this IP funding was critical because their foundational CDMA patents, especially for that global shift to 3G, meant that even the established standards like GSM had to borrow heavily from Qualcomm's work. So paying that licensing fee became really the cost of entry to the modern mobile world.
Okay, I absolutely get the R&D funding argument. It's clearly effective. No one's denying that. But the core of the debate for me isn't whether there should be a fee. It's about the way they extract it, the mechanism, which I still maintain is abusive. You're focusing on the value they create, the standard itself, but I'm focused on the value they extract, specifically that percentage calculation. The real heart of the legal battles and the industry complaints, what manufacturers widely called the Qualcomm tax, is that they demand a royalty, typically 3% to 5%, based on the total selling price of the entire phone, not just the cost of the modem chip they provide. And this is where that double-dipping idea gets really concrete. We should probably clarify that structure a bit.
Yes, please do. Explain the mechanism for everyone.
Sure. So Qualcomm essentially runs two main shops. There's QCT, that's the division selling the actual hardware, the physical modem chips, for a set price, competing like any other component supplier. Then there's QTL, the separate licensing division. QTL charges that percentage fee simply for the right to use the underlying intellectual property, the essential patents that make the standards work. So manufacturers feel like they're paying twice, once for the chip itself from QCT and then again for the IP license from QTL. Now the problem, the leverage point that feels abusive, is that the QTL percentage is tied to the final price the consumer pays. So let's say a company invests heavily, improves the camera, puts in a brilliant new screen, develops amazing software, and they can sell that phone for $600 instead of, say, a basic $100 model. Qualcomm automatically gets more money, maybe $18 to $30 instead of just $3 to $5. Even if the Qualcomm modem chip inside is exactly the same. They're essentially getting a cut of value created entirely by someone else's innovation. Innovations totally unrelated to the modem. And that's the structure that led to massive lawsuits and billions in fines from regulators in South Korea, China, Taiwan, Europe, and even the US FTC.
That's definitely a strong case against the pricing structure. But I think focusing just on the camera or the screen, while it sounds unfair on the surface, kind of misses the fundamental technical contribution that, I argue, justifies calculating the fee that way. You're saying that toll should only be based on the tires of the car. I'm saying the toll has to reflect the value of the entire advanced highway system itself, a highway built largely to Qualcomm specifications.
You call it a highway. I see it as one crucial component, yes, but still a component. And the fee should reflect that component's value, not everything else bolted onto the chassis. How does the underlying CDMA technology possibly justify Qualcomm getting more money just because I spent $1 billion developing a better camera sensor?
Because the ability for that amazing camera sensor to instantly upload high-definition video or photos relies entirely on the efficiency and capability of the underlying communication standard. We need to quickly revisit the technical leap that CDMA represented. Before Qualcomm pushed CDMA, the dominant standard was TDMA, used in GSM. Think of it like a walkie-talkie system at a party. Only one person can talk at a time, in very strict short time slots. It wasn't very efficient. CDMA completely changed that. It allowed everyone on the same frequency band to talk simultaneously by giving each user a unique code, like a unique language. Everything else just sounds like background noise to your phone.
Okay, like a very complex digital conversation instead of people taking turns.
Precisely, a much more efficient use of the airwaves, and that fundamental breakthrough, that efficiency, is what underpins 3G, 4G, and 5G networks globally. So when a manufacturer puts a modem in a phone, they aren't just buying a piece of silicon. They're buying access to the rulebook, the standard that Qualcomm largely authored, which allows that phone to work effectively on the network at all. The phone's final market value, whether it's $100 or $1,000, is only realized because it can communicate efficiently using that standard, Qualcomm enabled. So you say the toll shouldn't be based on the fancy car's total value, but I'd argue that without the CDMA engine design, without that blueprint, the car, with its fancy sunroof and leather seats, or camera and screen, can't even leave the garage to realize that value. The fee reflects the enabled value, the access to the highway, not just the cost of the engine part itself.
That's a sophisticated way to defend what many see as patent stacking, I'll grant you. But it still feels hard to square with the sheer amount of market friction and legal opposition this model created. If the justification was so straightforward, why did it lead to years of incredibly bitter existential legal battles with Apple? Arguably the most powerful tech company on earth. Let's unpack that Apple lawsuit and the 2019 settlement. Because while some saw it as a clear win for Qualcomm, I read it very differently, more like a forced surrender by Apple, driven purely by cold, hard supply chain realities.
Well, I see why you'd frame it as forced, but doesn't the very fact that such a powerful company was forced to settle actually prove the market necessity? Doesn't it prove the resilience of the model? Apple fought them intensely for years.
But we have to look at why they settled. Apple saw this as a mortal legal battle. They fundamentally disagreed with the QTL economics and were fully prepared to fight it out. The game changer, the thing that forced their hand, was the absolute catastrophic failure of their alternative chip supplier, Intel. Intel simply could not deliver a working competitive 5G modem chip in time for Apple's crucial 5G iPhone launch. Think about the stakes. Apple had to launch 5G phones. And at that moment, only Qualcomm possessed the proven leading-edge 5G modems, the X50, the X60, that could make it happen reliably globally. Apple was strategically backed into a corner. They had no choice but to accept the very QTL terms they'd spent years and millions fighting, sign a new 6-year license deal, and pay a massive sum in back royalties. Estimates are around $4.5 to $5 billion. It was driven by supply necessity, not a sudden agreement that the model was fair.
But the outcome, regardless of Apple's internal motivations, speaks volumes. Qualcomm went head-to-head with the world's richest, most powerful tech company. They successfully defended their core business model, that percentage royalty. They extracted a huge payment, and almost immediately, Intel exited the 5G modem business entirely. That's not just a legal win, it's a profound validation by the market itself. It proved their IP was indispensable, their patent wall too high even for Apple to climb over at that critical moment. It cemented their status, at least for a time, as strategically irreplaceable.
Irreplaceable, perhaps, but certainly not invincible. And this actually highlights a dangerous codependency between Qualcomm's two parts. The heavy reliance on that high-margin licensing money from QTL has arguably papered over some serious cracks and near disasters in their actual chip-making division, QCT. Remember the Snapdragon 810 fiasco back in 2014? That wasn't just a small stumble. It was a genuine disaster. The chip had significant overheating problems, forcing phones to slow down, throttling performance. And the result was huge. Qualcomm lost Samsung's business for the global version of the Galaxy S6. Samsung used their own Exynos chip instead. Losing the world's biggest Android maker for their flagship phone, that was a massive blow to QCT. It could have derailed their entire chip roadmap.
That history is important, absolutely, but it actually leads right back to my core point. The QTL model paid for the recovery from that disaster. It proved its value as a safety net, an accelerator. Yes, the 8010 failure was a huge risk, but the enormous capital generated by QTL, the very money you criticize as unfairly obtained, allowed Qualcomm to absorb that hit and pivot incredibly quickly. They realized they'd made a mistake, maybe chasing marketing by using generic ARM cores, so they poured that QTL-funded R&D money into developing their own custom 64-bit cores, which they branded Cairo. That intense, very expensive re-engineering effort produced the Snapdragon 820, which was a huge success. It won Samsung back for the Galaxy S7 and completely stabilized their chip business. Without that reliable, massive cash flow from QTL, a failure like the A10 could have absolutely crippled a company less financially fortified.
The recovery was impressive, no doubt. But that dependency itself remains a significant vulnerability, doesn't it? Relying so heavily on licensing income means they're always navigating this tightrope of ongoing regulatory scrutiny. The threat of more fines, more legal challenges is always there, plus the lingering resentment from customers who still see the structure as fundamentally unfair.
But look at what that capital enables now. It ensures not just survival, but future growth through diversification. And that, I think, is the ultimate proof of the model's long-term strategic value. They are using their IP strength and the funds it generates to push aggressively beyond the maturing smartphone market. Look at automotive. The Snapdragon digital chassis is becoming central to modern connected cars, built on their modem tech and IP. Look at IoT and XR. They're powering devices like the MetaQuest headsets. And maybe most significantly, they're taking on the old Wintel PC duopoly. Leveraging the success of ARM architecture, the same approach Apple used to get back into the PC processor game. This huge multi-pronged diversification effort, which is key to their future as the smartphone market potentially plateaus, is all funded by the stable, immense wealth generated by QTL. That really confirms its role as an engine for innovation and industry advancement, not just some kind of punitive tax.
Okay, so summing up my side, while the model is undeniably incredibly effective, it generates huge revenue, it funds critical R&D, it enables that impressive diversification. Its success seems inseparable from the leverage provided by its essential IP. It forces the industry, even giants like Apple, to accept terms they clearly dislike, paying a premium that scales with features entirely unrelated to Qualcomm's direct contribution. So the model seems to prioritize IP extraction and this unique financial structure over what you might call pure competitive component pricing.
And my position remains that this model represents the justified price of admission. It's the cost of accessing the most advanced mobile communication ecosystem humanity has ever built.
Yes, it's a toll booth on the digital highway, but that toll is the very fuel that funds the R&D for the next generation of that highway, be it 6G, connected cars, or the future of personal computing.
It certainly highlights this deep, complex tension in modern technology, doesn't it? Whether the sheer value of revolutionary invention, especially ideas that, as the story goes, were once laughed at by the whole world, fully justifies creating these powerful financial mechanisms that much of the industry views as both necessary and punitive.
It really shows how tightly intellectual property, engineering skill, and financial engineering have to be woven together to achieve, and perhaps more importantly, maintain global tech leadership in this era.
Indeed. And there's clearly more to unpack in the source material about that ongoing friction between maintaining this kind of financial edge and navigating the demands of regulators and powerful customers around the world.
If we trace the roots of your smartphone's ability to connect, whether running iOS or Android, whether connecting to 4G or the latest 5G, we don't find the answers in the manic hustle of Silicon Valley, but more in the academic calm of San Diego. That's where a story of one company unfolded, one the entire modern tech world now insists it cannot live without.
Yeah, that organization is Qualcomm. And our mission today really is to dive deep into the source materials detailing their incredible journey. This isn't just, the story of a successful chip designer. It's the definitive account of the organization that, while they didn't invent the cell phone itself, fundamentally dictated the physics-based rules of how mobile communication works. And then, on top of that, built one of the most controversial, yet let's face it, financially effective business models in corporate history to fund global innovation.
And the claims around Qualcomm's influence are, frankly, staggering when you dig into it. According to the evidence we've seen, they're not a phone maker, nope. Yet without their underlying tech, the iPhone might not function as it does today. Android, as an operating system, might never have existed in its current form, as this powerful integrated ecosystem.
It's a big claim, but there's evidence there.
And maybe most critically, the lightning-fast 5G network you rely on, well, it might not have become a global reality when it did without them.
It's quite a narrative. It's built on, genius engineering, near-fatal risks, decades of corporate warfare, and profit margins that make the rest of the semiconductor world pretty green with envy.
So to understand this, we need to set the scene, not the Bay Area. Right?
No, not Silicon Valley this time. We're talking La Jolla, San Diego, California. Back in 1985, think about that era, bulky analog brick phones.
Oh yeah, those things.
Calls were expensive, plagued by static.
Yeah.
And the internet. Still largely an academic and government thing. Very different world.
Okay, let's unpack this genesis story then. The founders of Qualcomm, they weren't your typical, college dropouts with VC money. These guys were already heavy hitters.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the intellectual firepower, specifically Dr. Irwin Jacobs and Andrew Viterbi.
Yeah, we're talking about academic royalty here. Dr. Jacobs, a distinguished professor of electrical engineering, taught at MIT, then moved to UCSD, University of California, San Diego.
Top tier.
Absolutely. And Andrew Viterbi was equally brilliant. But the key thing, as you said, they weren't just academics. They were already seasoned entrepreneurs.
Right, because they'd done this before. They had a successful company, Linkabit. They gave them, presumably, the capital and the confidence for this next big swing.
Precisely. They co-founded Linkabit way back in 1968. And Linkabit, it focused on really advanced digital satellite communications coding theory. A lot of it was for the U.S. military and intelligence sectors.
So deep tech, cryptography, signal processing. Serious stuff.
Very serious, heavy-duty stuff. When they sold Linkabit in 1980, they'd already proven they could translate complex theory into mission-critical hardware and, importantly, make a business out of it.
So they were basically, retired? Wealthy academics, maybe a bit bored, looking for the next impossible problem to solve.
That's definitely the vibe you get from the sources. These are minds that just don't stop. So, July 1985, Jacobs gets 7 veterans from Linkabit together at his house.
Okay.
They all agreed. The next big frontier wasn't fixed lines anymore. It was wireless digital communication. And they picked the name Qualcomm, short for Quality Communications.
Kind of signaling their intent right there in the name.
Yeah.
Deep technical excellence.
Exactly. It was in their DNA.
So they've got the brains, they've got the vision, but no product yet. If the goal is wireless digital communication, which barely existed then, how did this brain trust keep the lights on? pay the bills.
Well, they had the belief, sure, but yeah, no immediate market application. So initially, they did what they knew. They took on research contracts, a lot of it continuing similar work for government agencies just to keep cash flowing.
Okay, makes sense. But that's not sustainable long-term for a big vision.
No, it wasn't. The real stable revenue stream, the thing that really gave them the financial bedrock, the funding, to take that huge, honestly crazy technological gamble later on, it came from a product completely outside the mobile phone world.
The famous Omnitrack system for trucking, right?
Correct. You got to picture the American long-haul trucking industry in the late 1980s. Logistics were a nightmare for these companies.
No real-time tracking.
None, no way to know exactly where their trucks were. Communication was expensive, often unreliable radio calls. Qualcomm spotted this huge unserved need for efficiency.
So what did Omnitrack actually do back then that was so revolutionary?
It was a satellite-based system, communication and tracking. Truckers got this, well, pretty bulky terminal in their cabs,
I bet.
communicating via Ku-band satellite dishes with Qualcomm's central hub. This let managers track the exact location of every truck using early satellite positioning. Crucially, though, it also let drivers send short-coded text messages back to HQ.
Like texting before texting was really a thing.
Kind of. It cut down massively on expensive voice calls, boosted efficiency hugely. Think dispatch, updates, location, all via short messages.
Wow. So like a private industrial-grade GPS and messaging system way ahead of its time. Yeah. And it provided real value.
Absolutely. It was a massive commercial success. Omnitrack became Qualcomm's undisputed cash cow. The revenue was stable, predictable, high margin, and completely separate from the ups and downs of consumer electronics.
And that financial context is key, you're saying?
It's absolutely crucial. This reliable profit stream is what funded their real long-term ambition, the one the rest of the industry thought was pure folly.
Which was waging a standards war, betting the company on a whole new way of doing digital wireless.
Exactly. They used the trucking money to fund the fight against the global telecom giants.
Okay, so let's move into that, the standard wars. By the late 80s, everyone knew 1G analog was finished. It was noisy, inefficient with spectrum, totally insecure.
Yeah, anyone with a cheap radio scanner could listen in on your calls. Not great.
So the future was 2G digital. But the big question was how? How do you manage millions of digital calls efficiently across this limited resource, the radio spectrum?
Right. And the world pretty quickly settled on two main approaches for sharing that spectrum. First, you had FDMA, frequency division, multiple access.
That one seems straightforward. Every call gets its own private frequency channel, its own lane on the highway.
Yeah, think of it like a restaurant where every conversation gets its own private booth. Works great, perfect separation, but the number of booths, the amount of spectrum is strictly limited. You run out of space fast.
Okay. And the other big one, the one Europe really backed, especially with GSM, was TDMA, time division multiple access.
TDMA was seen as the clever compromise. Instead of separate booths, everyone shares one big table, one frequency channel, but you enforce strict turn-taking. Person A talks for, say, 10 milliseconds, then silence. Then person B talks for 10 milliseconds, and so on.
Slicing up time.
Exactly, slicing time to share the frequency, more spectrum efficient than FDMA. This was really the established path for 2G worldwide.
And then along comes Qualcomm. These academic heavyweights flush with trucking cash, saying, nope, we reject both FDMA and TDMA. We're going to resurrect this complex, mostly forgotten military theory called code division, multiple access CDMA.
Talk about audacious, right?
Yeah.
Jacobs and his team dusted off this theory. It had some niche military uses, mainly for anti-jamming security, because the signal is spread out. But everyone dismissed it as way too complex for civilian mass market use.
Why? What was the core idea? Because CDMA has everyone sharing the same frequency at the same time. How does that not just create total chaos, digital noise?
That sounds impossible, doesn't it? But that's where the code part comes in. This is the absolute key concept to grasp for Qualcomm's story. Think about being in a really loud pub. Okay, a big party, hundreds of people talking at once.
It's just a wall of noise.
Exactly. But imagine that every pair of people you and the person you're calling are speaking a unique private language, a secret code. Your phone, your ear in this analogy, is tuned only to understand your specific code.
Ah, I see.
everything else, all those other conversations using different codes just gets filtered out. It becomes like background noise that your brain or the phone's processor can ignore. The code is what separates the signals, not the time slot or the frequency channel.
Okay, that pub analogy really helps. So I don't need my own booth, and I don't need to wait my turn. I just need my secret digital decoder ring.
That's a great way to put it. And the potential advantages were huge. Theoretically, CDMA could handle 5, maybe even 10 times more users on the same slice of spectrum compared to TDMA.
Wow, big efficiency gain.
Huge. Plus, it's inherently more secure because you need that specific code to even decode the conversation. And the signals were more robust. They didn't just abruptly drop off a cliff when you moved away from the tower like analog or even TDMA sometimes did. The signal is spread across a wider band, making it harder to lose completely. More like a gradual fade.
But the established industry wasn't buying it. They laughed, right? Called it Jacob's Folly. What were the specific technical reasons they thought it was impossible?
There were 2 main arguments you heard constantly from the big players like Motorola, Nokia, Ericsson. First was synchronization. CDMA requires incredibly precise timing across the entire network. Every phone needs to know exactly when to start and stop its code pattern, almost down to the nanosecond.
Across a whole city.
Yeah.
Or country.
Yeah. Coordinating thousands, potentially millions of moving phones simultaneously. The experts just said, look, that's impossible outside a controlled lab environment. Can't be done reliably in the real world.
Okay, sync is one. What was the other big hurdle?
The other was the near-far problem. This was considered a fundamental physics issue. If you have one phone right next to the cell tower, the near phone, its signal is super strong, and another phone way out at the edge of the cell, the far phone, its signal is very weak.
Right.
The worry was the strong signal from the near phone would just completely drown out the weak signal from the far phone, even with the codes. Like someone shouting right next to you while someone else whispers from across the room, you just can't hear the whisper.
So a signal power management issue. How did Qualcomm claim to solve that?
Well, they claimed, and later proved, they solved it with really sophisticated, intricate power control algorithms built right into their chipsets and the base stations. Essentially, the system constantly tells the near phones to dial back their power, to whisper, and it tells the far phones to boost their power, to shout.
Leveling the playing field dynamically.
Exactly. Constant adjustments to keep all signals arriving at the base station at roughly the same power level. But, theory is one thing. They needed to prove it.
And that leaves us to the legendary 1989 demonstration in San Diego, Showdown Time.
You bet. They basically invited all the biggest skeptics, engineers from all the major telecom companies, put them in a van loaded with Qualcomm's prototype CDMA gear.
That's a bit intense.
Oh, I imagine incredibly tense. They drove around San Diego, making crystal clear digital calls between 2 moving trucks using CDMA. The first big test was robustness. They deliberately drove into a canyon known for terrible analog reception. The standard analog call dropped instantly, just static. But the CDMA call stayed perfectly clear, didn't waver.
Okay, point 1 for Qualcomm. Robustness proved.
Then came the real clincher, the test that apparently just blew the observers away. They configured things so that both an analog call and their CDMA call were routed into the exact same base station, using the exact same frequency channel at the exact same time.
Directly competing for the same resources.
Head to head. The analog call immediately collapsed into useless noise, completely overwhelmed by the interference from the CDMA signal. But the CDMA call continued without a hitch. Flawless.
Wow, they actually showed it worked. Simultaneous use, clear calls.
They proved it, visually, audibly. Coexistence was possible. The physics worked. Jacob's folly wasn't folly after all.
Okay, so they win the tech argument. But winning the market, that's a whole different war, especially when Europe and most of the world were already pouring billions into the rival GSM TDMA standard. How did Qualcomm even survive, let alone get adoption?
They were incredibly vulnerable at that point. You had giants like Nokia, Ericsson, Siemens totally committed to GSM. Billions invested in infrastructure already. The US market was initially hesitant, kind of split. Qualcomm desperately needed a major win, a big national-level partner to validate CDMA on a massive scale.
And that partner turned out to be South Korea.
South Korea. It was a masterstroke, or maybe a stroke of luck, depending on how you see it.
Why them?
Well, in the early 1990s, the South Korean government was intensely focused on becoming a global tech leader. They saw how Europe and Japan were standardizing on GSM, and instead of seeing that as the inevitable path, they saw it as an opportunity to leapfrog.
Take a risk on the underdog technology for a potential advantage.
Exactly. They viewed CDMA, despite the risks, as potentially offering superior capacity and, crucially, a better path towards future high-speed data. It was a huge gamble, but they believed it could give them a long-term competitive edge in mobile tech.
So the government basically mandated CDMA for the country.
Pretty much. They decided to build their entire national mobile network based on Qualcomm's CDMA. This was the absolute lifeline Qualcomm needed.
Huge implication.
Massive. It guaranteed Qualcomm significant revenue, it gave them massive credibility, and most importantly, it provided a large-scale, successful case study proving CDMA worked reliably in the real world at national scale.
And that momentum helped in the U.S.
Definitely. It helped convince major U.S. carriers, specifically AirTouch, which later became part of Verizon and Sprint, to adopt CDMA. This led to that split U.S. market we had for years, with AT&T and T-Mobile primarily using GSM TDMA and Verizon and Sprint on CDMA.
So while GSM won the global 2G volume game, CDMA survived and carved out a significant niche. But the real legacy, you're saying, wasn't just about 2G voice calls.
No, the crucial legacy, the thing that set the stage for everything that followed, was 3G. When the world started demanding mobile data, mobile internet, it quickly became clear that the fundamental principles behind CDMA,
Like spreading the signal, the sophisticated power control.
exactly those things. They proved to be far better suited for achieving the higher data speeds and network efficiency needed for 3G. So much so that even the groups evolving GSM had to incorporate technologies heavily based on or licensed from Qualcomm's deep portfolio of CDMA-derived patents to make their own 3G work effectively.
So even though they didn't win the 2G market share battle globally, their technology won the future.
In a fundamental way, yes. That technical victory in CDMA, even if it wasn't a complete market rout in 2G, laid the absolute foundation for their future dominance and their incredibly lucrative intellectual property empire.
Okay, that makes sense. So the tech is proven, they've got key partners, but they haven't won the hardware manufacturing game globally. Then comes this big strategic shift in the mid-90s. Jacobs and the team decide the real gold isn't actually selling phones, like their early PDQ smartphone attempt.
Yeah, they had this moment of clarity, it seems. They looked at the hardware business making phones, making base station equipment, and saw it was super expensive, high-risk, thin margins.
Competing against giants like Motorola, Nokia.
Exactly. It was a brutal, low-margin slog. They realized Qualcomm's true, unique asset wasn't the factory floor. It was the ideas, the math, the physics codified in their patents. It was the engineers' brains, not the supply chain.
So they made a huge pivot. They actually sold off their phone manufacturing business and their infrastructure business entirely.
They did. It was a really bold and arguably ruthless strategic move. They completely reorganized the company around two core pillars, two distinct businesses.
Okay, what were they?
Pillar one became QCT Qualcomm CDMA Technologies. That's the hardware arm we mostly know today. But crucially, it's a fabless chip business.
Meaning they design the chips but don't make them physically.
Exactly. They design these incredibly complex chips, the Snapdragon processors, the modems, the brains of the phone, arguably the most complex silicon in the mobile world. But they outsource the actual manufacturing, the fabrication, to partners like TSMC and Taiwan.
So Qualcomm keeps the high-value design work, the IP part of the chip.
Right. High margin, less capital intensive than running giant factories. That's QCT.
Okay. And pillar two. This is the controversial one, right? QTL.
Ah, yes. QTL, Qualcomm Technology Licensing. This is the division that became the financial engine, the source of those massive profits, and, well, the source of endless legal battles for decades.
This is the IP empire builder.
Absolutely. Because Qualcomm holds so many standard essential patents, or SEPs.
These are patents you absolutely must use to comply with a standard like 3G, 4G, or 5G.
Correct. You cannot build a device that connects to these networks without using technology covered by Qualcomm's SEPs. They hold fundamental patents on how digital communication works wirelessly. So any company anywhere in the world that wants to make a phone or a tablet or anything that connects to a modern cellular network.
They have to get a license from QTL. Qualcomm holds the keys to the kingdom.
You got it. They need that license.
And this brings us to the heart of the controversy, the infamous Qualcomm tax. It's not just that they charge a fee, that's how they charge it, right? The payment structure itself is what caused all the friction.
That's the absolute crux of it. It's the mechanism that generated billions and enraged the entire industry. Qualcomm, through QTL, doesn't charge a license fee based on the cost of the modem chip itself. QCT sells the chip, that's a separate transaction.
Right.
QTL demands a percentage typically reported between 3% and 5% of the total wholesale selling price of the entire finished device.
Wait, let me make sure I understand that because it sounds wild. So if a phone manufacturer, say Apple or Samsung, makes a phone that sells for $100 wholesale, Qualcomm gets $3 to $5 from QTL.
Correct.
But if that manufacturer then adds a much better camera, a bigger, fancier screen, maybe a titanium body, and now the phone sells wholesale for $600. Qualcomm's QTL division gets $18 to $30 on that same phone, even if the actual Qualcomm modem chip inside is identical.
That is precisely how it works and why manufacturers absolutely hated it.
They're paying a royalty on the value of the screen, the camera, the memory, the battery components. Qualcomm didn't invent and holds no patents on. How did Qualcomm legally justify that? It seems unfair.
That's the core legal argument Qualcomm defended in courts all over the world for years. Their position was this: the patents aren't just on the chip. They're on the fundamental capability of the device to be a mobile connected device.
Ah, the enabling technology argument.
Exactly. They argued that without the ability to connect to the network, the very thing their essential patents enable, that fancy screen, that amazing camera, that titanium chassis, they're all basically worthless in a mobile context. The entire value proposition of the smartphone hinges on that connectivity. Therefore, they argued, they were entitled to a percentage of the total device value.
So the phone makers felt like they were getting hit twice. They pay QCT for the physical chip, and then they pay QTL this percentage fee on the whole phone, including their own innovations. The double dip.
That's exactly the term they used, double dipping. They resented it deeply. But why did they keep paying?
Because they had no choice if they wanted cell phones.
Pretty much. Qualcomm's leverage was immense. The implicit and sometimes explicit message was no license, no chips, or more broadly, no license, your phone can't legally connect to the network standards we hold the keys to. If you wanted to be in the mobile business globally, you paid the Qualcomm toll.
That structure must generate just astronomical profits from QTL. Pure licensing revenue.
Astronomical and incredibly high margin. We're talking software-like margins on IP. And this is where Qualcomm would argue the model's brilliance comes in.
How so?
They described it as a virtuous cycle, a self-funding innovation engine. QTL generates these massive profits. That cash flow funds a gigantic world-leading R&D budget, billions and billions per year.
Right.
That R&D then creates the next generation of essential patents for 4G, then 5G, now working on 6G. Those patents lead to better, faster, more essential chips from QCT, which in turn ensures that competitors must continue to license the technology from QTL to stay competitive.
Which generates more royalty money.
Which funds more R&D. Round and round it goes. They effectively built this incredibly powerful feedback loop, institutionalizing themselves as the gatekeeper, the toll booth on the wireless information highway, using their IP leverage to perpetually fund the innovation that kept them ahead.
Wow. Okay, so that sets the stage for their chip dominance. But then the game changed again, didn't it? 2007, the iPhone arrives.
Totally changed the game. Mobile wasn't just about making calls or sending texts anymore. Suddenly it was about high-speed data, running complex apps, mobile web browsing, gaming, watching video.
It became about mobile computing.
Exactly. And Qualcomm realized pretty quickly that the battleground had shifted. Just providing the modem, which was their initial strength, wasn't going to be enough long-term.
Because early iPhones, they didn't use Qualcomm modems initially, right? They used Infineon and Samsung processors.
Correct. Apple sourced components separately. Qualcomm recognized that to win in this new smartphone era, they couldn't just be a component supplier. They needed to offer the whole integrated package, the brain of the phone.
And their answer was Snapdragon.
Snapdragon. Introduced around 2007-2008. It wasn't just a modem, it wasn't just a processor, it was conceived as a system on chip. And so, a whole miniaturized computer system squeezed onto one tiny piece of silicon.
Why was that integration so important?
Because smartphones have brutal constraints. Battery life is paramount. Heat is a killer. Physical space inside that thin chassis is incredibly tight. Integrating everything onto one chip The brains, the graphics, the modem, memory controllers, everything was the key to managing power, heat, and size efficiently.
So what actually went into a Snapdragon soup back then? What were the key custom pieces?
They really went all in on custom design. They developed their own CPU cores, starting with Scorpion, then the very successful Crate series, later Creo. So these were designed specifically for mobile power efficiency, not just raw speed like desktop chips.
Okay, custom CPUs.
Then they bought AMD's mobile graphics division, handheld graphics, back in 2009. That became the foundation for their Adreno GPU, giving them control over graphics performance.
Graphics are crucial for smartphones.
Absolutely. Then they had the Hexagon DSP, a digital signal processor optimized for tasks like audio processing, sensor fusion, and later AI computations. And critically, woven into the fabric of the SoC was their own industry-leading 3G and later 4G and 5G modem technology.
That integration, having the modem right there on the same chip, that was their killer advantage, especially when Android took off after 2010.
It was the killer advantage. As Google's Android exploded, manufacturers like Samsung, HTC, LG, Sony, they needed a powerful, ready-to-go platform, fast. Qualcomm offered this beautiful integrated package.
Compared to rivals who might have had a good processor, but then had to bolt on a separate modem chip.
Exactly. Using a separate modem chip consumes more power, generates more heat, takes up more board space. Qualcomm's integrated solution was just more elegant, more efficient. They became, as people said, the Intel of the mobile age. Their Snapdragon 800 series in the early 2010s just dominated the high-end Android market. Absolute peak performance and efficiency for its time.
But this period of, well, maybe feeling a bit invincible, led directly into their biggest crisis, didn't it? The Snapdragon 810 disaster in 2014. What went so wrong?
Oh, the 810. Yeah, that was a dark time for QCT. It really seems like it was a failure driven by market panic, not sound engineering.
Panic about what?
Apple. In 2013, Apple shocked everyone by releasing the iPhone 5s with the A7 chip, the world's first 64-bit mobile processor.
Which was a huge leap, technically.
Huge. Now, realistically, the Android ecosystem wasn't really ready for 64-bit yet. The software, the apps weren't optimized. But the marketing pressure on Qualcomm was immense. Suddenly, their top-of-the-line, custom-designed 32-bit Crate cores looked old. Dated.
So they felt they had to rush to 64-bit to compete, even if the tech wasn't fully baked.
That appears to be exactly what happened. They rushed disastrously, and in doing so, they abandoned their winning formula, their successful custom Crate core design philosophy.
What did they do instead?
They didn't have time to design their own custom 64-bit core from scratch to meet the market window, so they took a shortcut. They licensed generic, off-the-shelf 64-bit core designs directly from ARM Holdings library, the Cortex A57 and A53 cores.
So using standard parts instead of their own secret sauce.
Essentially, yes. They prioritized getting a 64-bit chip out the door quickly over sticking to their traditional focus on deep, custom, power-efficient design integrated tightly with their modem and manufacturing process.
And these generic cores just couldn't handle the heat.
That was the infamous problem. The Snapdragon 810 became notorious for overheating. Those off-the-shelf ARM cores, apparently poorly optimized for Qualcomm's specific implementation and the demands of running alongside their powerful modem on likely an aggressive manufacturing node, they just ran incredibly hot.
So phones using it would get physically hot.
Uncomfortably hot, yeah. Just doing basic tasks sometimes. And when chips get too hot, they have to protect themselves by drastically slowing down their clock speed. It's called thermal throttling. Ah, so it gets hot, then it gets slow to cool down. The worst of both worlds.
Exactly. The result was a chip that was often both hot and disappointingly slow in real-world use because it was constantly throttling itself. A catastrophic failure for a flagship product.
The technical failure was bad enough, but the commercial fallout was potentially company-killing, wasn't it?
It was a genuine crisis. Samsung, their biggest and most crucial customer for high-end chips, made a brutal decision. They completely dropped the Snapdragon 810 for the global version of their flagship Galaxy S6 smartphone.
Ouch. What did they use instead?
They used their own internally developed Exynos processors globally for the S6. That was a massive blow to Qualcomm's revenue and, maybe more importantly, its reputation. Qualcomm's stock price plummeted. Analysts seriously questioned if their decade of dominance in mobile chips was over.
It must have been a huge wake-up call. Abandoning your engineering roots for marketing hype can be deadly.
Absolutely. Painful lesson learned. But what's really remarkable looking back is the comeback. They didn't just lick their wounds, they went straight back to the lab. Double down on custom engineering again.
Immediately, they poured resources into fixing the problem, into designing their own next-generation custom 64-bit core, and the result was the Snapdragon 820, released in late 2015.
Their redemption chip.
Totally. They went back to their roots. They unveiled a brand new custom 64-bit CPU core architecture called Creo. It was designed from the ground up by Qualcomm engineers for mobile efficiency, power management, tight integration.
And was it good?
It was spectacular, powerful, efficient, and crucially, it ran cool. It fixed all the problems of the 810, and the market noticed.
Did Samsung come back?
Yes. In a huge vote of confidence, Samsung returned to using the Snapdragon 820 for major versions of their next flagship, the Galaxy S7, in 2016. That basically signaled to the entire industry that Qualcomm was back. They had survived their biggest internal product disaster by remembering what made them successful in the first place. A deep commitment to quality engineering.
Okay, so they survived the 810 self-inflicted wound. But an even bigger external threat was brewing, wasn't it? The relationship with Apple.
Yeah. Even after the 810 comeback, the biggest storm was yet to hit. Apple. Now remember, Apple was actually Qualcomm's biggest customer for the physical modem chips, the QCT side, for years. From the iPhone 4s all the way through the iPhone 7 generation, those phones used Qualcomm modems.
Right. But Apple, especially under Tim Cook, absolutely hated that QTL licensing model, didn't they? That percentage of the total phone price.
Hated it with a passion. That dependency on Qualcomm for a critical component, combined with writing these multi-billion-dollar royalty checks every year based on the total value of the iPhone. It went against Apple's entire corporate philosophy of controlling its own destiny and supply chain and maximizing its own margin.
They don't like being dependent on anyone,
Right.
especially not paying that kind of tax.
Precisely. So in 2017, Apple declared all-out corporate war. They sued Qualcomm for a staggering $1 billion.
On what ground?
Accusing Qualcomm of monopolistic practices. Specifically, they alleged Qualcomm illegally used its no license, no chips, leverage, refusing to sell modem chips unless Apple also paid the QTL royalty to extort unfair payments. They called it patent abuse.
And Qualcomm didn't just roll over, I assume.
Oh, not at all. Qualcomm countersued aggressively. They accused Apple of infringing on Qualcomm patents they weren't paying for, and they made a really explosive allegation that Apple had secretly shared Qualcomm's highly confidential proprietary modem source code and technical details with a direct rival.
Meaning Intel, who was trying desperately to build a competing modem.
That was the clear implication. Qualcomm was suggesting Apple essentially stole their trade secrets to help Intel catch up.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a contract dispute. It became incredibly bitter, incredibly personal between the companies, a war over the fundamental business model of tech innovation.
And Apple was willing to play hardball. They actually stopped using Qualcomm modems entirely for a while, right?
Showed incredible resolve, or the stubbornness. Starting with the iPhone XS and XR generation in 2018, Apple switched completely away from Qualcomm modems. They went all in with Intel's 4G modems.
Was that a good move technically? Were Intel's modems as good?
Not according to basically all independent testing at the time. Tests consistently showed that the Intel modem iPhones had noticeably slower peak data speeds and, more importantly for many users, weaker signal reception in fringe areas compared to contemporary Android phones using Qualcomm modems.
So Apple knowingly accepted inferior network performance in their flagship product.
It appears so. They were willing to sacrifice some performance as a pressure tactic to show Qualcomm they could live without them, hoping to break the licensing model or at least force better terms.
And this legal battle wasn't just Apple versus Qualcomm. The whole world seemed to be piling on Qualcomm's licensing practices around this time.
It really felt like the walls were closing in. It wasn't just Apple. Regulators across the globe, South Korea, China, Taiwan, the European Union, even the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, FTC, here at home were launching investigations, hitting Qualcomm with massive fines, sometimes billions of dollars, all fundamentally challenging the legality of that QTL model, that percentage of device royalty.
It looked like the IP empire might actually crumble under the combined assault.
It was a global pincer movement. Everything seemed to be heading towards this huge climactic court battle scheduled for May 2019 in San Diego. Apple versus Qualcomm, face-to-face. It promised to be epic, revealing secrets from both sides.
But then it just stopped on day one.
Exactly. Just as the trial was about to begin, boom, a stunning announcement. They had settled immediately. Shockwaves through the entire tech industry.
How? Why? Apple seemed determined to fight this. They're the most valuable company on Earth. Why would they suddenly back down and agree to keep paying the Qualcomm tax?
One word, really, according to all the sources, 5G.
The next generation was looming.
It wasn't just looming, it was critical. Apple absolutely needed to launch a world-class 5G iPhone to stay competitive. And the hard truth they apparently had to face was that Intel, their chosen alternative supplier, had failed. Utterly failed.
Intel couldn't deliver a competitive 5G modem.
Nope. They just couldn't master the complexity, especially integrating the modem efficiently, the baseband, and developing the sophisticated millimeter wave antenna modules needed for the highest 5G speeds. They were years behind Qualcomm.
So Apple realized they had no path to a competitive 5G iPhone without going back to Qualcomm. Their leverage was gone.
That seems to be the unavoidable conclusion from the timing and the settlement terms. Apple was technologically cornered. They needed Qualcomm's tech to make the 5G transition happen for the iPhone 12.
And the terms of that settlement. A clear win for Qualcomm.
A massive win for Qualcomm by any measure. First, Apple paid Qualcomm an enormous sum. Estimates range from $4.5 billion to maybe $6 billion to settle all the past royalty disputes. Just a huge check.
Wow.
Second, and critically, Apple signed a brand new 6-year global patent licensing agreement, meaning they agreed to continue paying the QTL royalty, the percentage-based fee, for access to Qualcomm's essential 5G patents. The model survived.
They essentially surrendered on the core issue.
And third, they signed a multi-year chip supply agreement, guaranteeing that Qualcomm's 5G modems would be back inside iPhones, starting with the iPhone 12.
The ultimate confirmation that Apple needed them? What happened to Intel after that?
The very same day the Apple-Qualcomm settlement was announced, Intel announced they were immediately exiting the 5G smartphone modem business entirely. They later sold the majority of those assets to Apple. It was a clear admission of defeat. Qualcomm had faced down the biggest company in the world, defended its core business model, and cemented its absolute necessity for the 5G era.
An incredible corporate turnaround and legal victory. But surely that whole saga, plus the earlier A10 mess, taught them some lessons about relying too heavily on just smartphones or just a couple of giant customers like Apple and Samsung.
Oh, absolutely. The sources suggest those two near-death experiences, the 810 failure showing product risk, and the Apple war showing customer dependency risk, really drove home the need for diversification. Relying so much on the volatile smartphone market and those two giants was just too dangerous long-term.
So, under the current CEO, Cristiano Amon, the strategy has been to push Qualcomm's technology into new areas. If that core cellular IP is their strength, where else are they planting that toll booth?
They've been very strategic about targeting adjacent markets where their core competencies, wireless connectivity, low-power, high-performance processing, integration are becoming critical. 3 big areas stand out.
Okay, what's the first?
Automotive. This is a huge one. Cars are rapidly becoming, as people say, smartphones on wheels.
Yeah, connected cars, infotainment, driver assistance.
Exactly. They need advanced connectivity, 5G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. They need powerful processors for complex digital cockpits, multiple high-res displays, sophisticated infotainment systems, and increasingly for processing sensor data for ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems, and eventually autonomous driving.
So Qualcomm adapted Snapdragon for cars.
They did. They created the Snapdragon digital chassis platform. It's a suite of technologies covering everything from the modem connection, telematics, to the in-car experience, infotainment digital cluster, and ADAS. They've had huge design wins here. They're now a leading supplier to major automakers like GM, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, embedding Qualcomm tech deep into the architecture of next-gen vehicles.
Okay, automotive is one. What's the second big push?
The second is the vast, sprawling category of IoT, the Internet of Things.
Which could mean almost anything connected.
It's huge, yeah. It covers everything from tiny, low-power industrial sensors to sophisticated smartwatches, wireless earbuds, and a big one for them, VR and AR headsets, virtual and augmented reality.
That makes sense. Those need mobile processing power and connectivity.
Exactly. Their Snapdragon XR platform XR for extended reality has become pretty much the standard processor platform powering most of the standalone VR and AR devices on the market today. Think about the popular Meta Quest headsets.
Those run on Snapdragon XR.
The Quest 2, Quest 3, Quest Pro, all powered by custom Snapdragon XR chips. Qualcomm leveraged their mobile expertise in squeezing high performance and graphics out of low-power chips, which is perfect for a battery-powered headset you wear on your face.
Right. So automotive, IoT, XR. What's the third major diversification bet?
The third one is maybe the most ambitious and definitely a long shot. trying again to crack the PC market, specifically Windows laptops.
Taking on the decades-long dominance of Intel and the x86 architecture in Windows, the Wintel Alliance, that's bold. They've tried and stumbled here before.
It's incredibly bold. For basically 30-plus years, high-performance Windows computing meant Intel, or AMD x86 processors. But Qualcomm believes the time is finally right for ARM architecture, the same efficient foundation that powers virtually all smartphones to make a serious play in laptops.
What's the pitch? Why ARM in a laptop?
The core value proposition is twofold. First, potentially much better battery life than traditional x86 laptops for similar performance levels, thanks to ARM's efficiency heritage. Second, and maybe more uniquely, Qualcomm is seamless, always on 5G connectivity built right into the chip. Laptops that are constantly connected like your phone.
What gives them confidence now? Hasn't Microsoft tried Windows on ARM before with limited success?
The game changer, honestly, was Apple again. Apple's phenomenal success with their M-series chips, the M1, M2, M3, and MacBooks, completely proved to the world that the ARM architecture could deliver truly high-end, competitive performance, sometimes even exceeding x86 while offering amazing battery life.
So Apple paved the way, showing ARM could do serious computing.
They completely validated the concept. It gave Qualcomm the perfect market timing and tailwind. They could position their new Snapdragon X Elite chips as the high-performance ARM solution for the Windows world, trying to become, in effect, the Apple Silicon equivalent for Windows PCs. It's still a huge uphill battle against the entrenched x86 ecosystem and software compatibility issues, but the potential is massive if they can pull it off.
Interesting. So even while they're pushing into cars, VR, and PCs, they're still maintaining that grip on the core 5G market.
Oh, absolutely. Diversification is key, but 5G remains the bedrock. They invested so heavily, so early in 5G R&D, back when 4G was still peaking, that they built up a significant technological lead, especially in complex areas like millimeter wave and modem integration. Their advanced modem series, the X50, X60, X65, X70, these have consistently been the gold standard.
So that technical lead is why, despite all the challenges and new ventures, they remain fundamentally essential for global mobile connectivity today.
Pretty much. That early, risky bet on CDMA, followed by relentless R&D funded by that controversial licensing model, has kept them at the heart of how our devices connect, generation after generation.
It really is an incredible journey when you lay it all out. 7 engineers in a house in San Diego, betting everything on a theory everyone else laughed at.
Winning that standards war, partly through sheer engineering brilliance, partly by leveraging South Korea's national ambition.
Then building this unbelievably profitable empire based not on factories, but on intellectual property, that royalty toll booth.
Stumbling badly with a product failure like the 810, showing they weren't infallible.
But then bouncing right back by returning to that core engineering quality.
And finally, winning that epic existential legal battle against Apple, the most powerful company on Earth, using the mandatory transition to 5G as the ultimate leverage.
The legacy, then, isn't just the chips themselves, is it? It's something deeper.
I think the true legacy of Qualcomm, particularly of Jacobs and Viterbi and the early team, isn't just the silicon, it's the standards. They literally wrote the rule book, the fundamental protocols for how billions of devices talk to each other wirelessly. They enabled the transformation of the phone from just a voice device into the incredibly powerful, always connected computer you carry in your pocket today.
Of course, the challenges aren't over. They still face immense pressure. Apple is pouring billions into finally developing its own in-house modem to escape Qualcomm's orbit.
Yeah, that's a constant threat.
And competitors like MediaTek in Taiwan are getting increasingly aggressive, especially in the mid-range, and even pushing into the high-end chip market.
True, the competition never sleeps. But if history tells us anything, Qualcomm has proven time and again to be a master of survival, innovation, and, let's be honest, protecting that incredibly valuable intellectual property toll booth at almost any cost.
That's quite a story.
It really is. Yeah. And maybe the next time you, listening right now, make a crystal clear video call while you're walking down the street, or stream a high-definition movie instantly, or maybe even rely on your car's navigation system seamlessly rerouting in real time. just remember that smooth, reliable connection isn't magic.
Right.
It's the end result of decades of really brutal R&D investment, incredibly fierce standards battles, near bankruptcy moments, and yeah, a highly controversial, high-stakes business model that was specifically engineered to fund the next technological leap and the one after that.
Which really makes you think.
It does. It raises a pretty crucial question for all of us looking forward.
Yeah.
As we move towards whatever 6G brings, towards pervasive AI, maybe towards the metaverse or ubiquitous augmented reality, what companies today are building those essential, perhaps even unavoidable, proprietary toll booths? Who will succeed in defining and maybe dictating the financial rules for the next decade of global technological progress?
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end, and see you in the next video.